My bank card was declined on a Tuesday morning in the middle of a coffee shop in front of 3 people I didn't know. I tried it again, same result. I checked my phone, the app loaded slowly, then showed me a number that made no sense. The balance in my joint savings account? The one my brother and I had set up after Dad passed? The one holding the $287,000 from the sale of Dad's workshop equipment and land rights? Read $0.30. I stood there holding a $4 coffee I couldn't pay for and felt something shift behind my eyes. Not panic, something colder than panic. I paid with a different card. I sat down. I called my brother. He picked up on the second ring, which he never does. "Hey," he said. "Too easy. Too ready." "The account," I said. "Check the joint account." A pause. One beat too long. "Oh yeah. Actually, I was going to talk to you about that. Danny, we had some pressing things come up on our end. The roof, the car, Rebecca's mother needs surgery. Where's the money, Trevor?" "Not a question." He heard it. "It's being handled responsibly," he said. "You're single, you don't have kids, you don't have a mortgage. We needed it more urgently. Dad would have understood." I hung up. I sat in that coffee shop for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the counter. Then I opened my contacts and called my attorney. "My name is Danielle Marsh. I'm 31 years old. I'm a freelance structural engineer, which means I spend my days calculating exactly how much weight a thing can hold before it fails. I've spent my whole career learning that nothing collapses without warning signs. You just have to know what you're looking at. I should have seen this one coming. The signs were there for months. I just kept telling myself families don't do this to each other. Mine did. Let me go back to the beginning. My dad was a quiet man who built things with his hands. He ran a small fabrication shop for 30 years. Custom metalwork, structural components, contract jobs for local construction firms. He wasn't rich by anyone's definition, but he owned the land, owned the equipment, and had a reputation that meant something in our county. When he died 18 months ago, fast, a stroke, no warning, he left behind a modest estate and 2 adult children who I thought loved each other. Trevor is 4 years older than me. He married Rebecca 9 years ago. I liked her well enough at first. She was sharp, organized, the kind of person who volunteers to manage group logistics because she genuinely enjoys it. But sometime in the last few years, that quality curdled into something else. She started organizing things that weren't hers to organize. Conversations, decisions, people. The first time I noticed it was at Dad's funeral reception. I was still numb, still moving through rooms like I was underwater, when Rebecca sidled up and mentioned, gently, warmly, that she'd already started making calls about the shop. "Just preliminary," she said. "Just so you two don't have to deal with it while you're grieving." I thanked her. I shouldn't have. Over the following weeks, Rebecca became the unofficial project manager of our father's estate. She was always available, always organized, always 3 steps ahead. She compiled a folder of documents I hadn't asked for. She arranged meetings with people I didn't know. She said things like, "Danny, you have so much on your plate. Let us handle the heavy lifting. That's what family is for." And I let her. That's the part I have to live with. I was gutted and overwhelmed, and someone offered to help, and I said yes. The estate attorney my father had used for decades, a man named Walt, who wore the same corduroy blazer to every meeting and called me young lady, in a way that was somehow not condescending, handled the formal probate proceedings. What he couldn't control was what happened after. Dad's will split everything evenly between Trevor and me. The shop equipment was auctioned. The land rights were sold to a development firm that had been circling the property for years. After fees and taxes, Trevor and I each had just under $144,000 coming to us. Rebecca suggested a joint savings account. "Just until you two figure out the next steps," she said. "Easier to manage, cleaner, you can both see everything." I agreed. I was an idiot. The account was open in both our names. We each had access. The money sat there for 4 months while I was finishing a contract job in another state. I checked in occasionally. The balance was always what it should be. I trusted him. He's my brother. He grew up in the same house I did, ate dinner at the same table, cried at the same funeral. I trusted him. The first crack appeared about 6 weeks before the Tuesday in the coffee shop. I called Trevor to talk about splitting the money and moving on. I'd been looking at buying a small property, something modest, nothing dramatic. He got vague on me. Said he needed a little more time. Said Rebecca was dealing with some things. I asked him directly, "Is the money still there?" "Of course," he said. "Why would you even ask that?" I didn't push. I believed him. Then came the Tuesday. After I called my attorney, I sat in my car in the coffee shop parking lot for a long time. The thing about a betrayal this size is that it doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in layers. The first layer is disbelief. Your brain just won't accept it. The second is the practical inventory. What do I actually know? What do I have? What do I miss? I went through it methodically. The account was joint. He had legal access. He could move the money without my signature. The question was whether he had any legal obligation to me, and whether what he'd done constituted fraud, theft, or breach of fiduciary duty. My attorney, a woman named Patricia, not on my list, this is a different Patricia, bear with me, called me back within 20 minutes. I laid out what I knew. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "Send me screenshots of everything. Account history, any messages from him or his wife about the estate. Do not contact him again today." I asked her if this was as bad as I thought. "It depends on the paper trail," she said. "Start gathering." Here's what I'd like to say. I was calm and strategic from that moment forward, laser-focused, unshakable. Here's what actually happened. I drove to a gas station, sat in the parking lot, and cried for 40 minutes. I cried for my dad, who trusted both of us. I cried for the version of my family I'd carried in my head my whole life. I cried because the last thing my dad ever said to me was that he was proud of how Trevor and I looked out for each other. Then I stopped. I wiped my face. I went home and I started building the case. What I found over the next 72 hours was worse than I expected and exactly as bad as I'd feared simultaneously. The account history showed 4 large transfers over 9 weeks, all initiated by Trevor. The largest was $180,000. There was no corresponding deposit anywhere I could find. I pulled every text message thread with Rebecca over the past year and started reading them with new eyes. There it was, small pieces, scattered across months. A text from Rebecca in January, "Just confirming you're still okay with us handling the investment piece, the window is short." I'd replied, "Sure, keep me posted." She had screenshotted that message. I found out later she'd shown it to someone as authorization. A voice note from Trevor in February, casual, like he was asking about the weather. "Hey, remember how Dad used to say, money sitting still is money dying? Just thinking about some options. Call me when you can." I never called him back. I was on deadline. That unanswered call became, in their version of events, my implied consent. And then the one that turned my stomach completely. A message from Rebecca to Trevor. She'd accidentally sent it to our family group chat and deleted it within minutes. But I'd seen the notification and I'd screenshotted it before the deletion went through. It said, "She's not paying attention. Move before Q2. I had kept that screenshot for 3 months and told myself I was paranoid. I was not paranoid. Here's the part I'm least proud of. I almost confronted them directly. I almost called Trevor and said everything I was thinking, laid it out, demanded answers. I had his name half dialed on a Wednesday night when my attorney called me instead. "Don't," she said before I could explain. "Whatever you're about to do, don't. If they know you're building a case, they'll get ahead of it. Right now they think you're blindsided and slow. Let them keep thinking that." I put my phone down. I let them keep thinking that. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. I had dinner with Trevor and Rebecca on a Saturday. Rebecca made pasta. She kept touching my arm and saying things like, "Danny, you look tired. You really need to slow down. You're always pushing yourself so hard." Trevor poured wine and talked about a vacation they were planning. I smiled. I ate the pasta. I answered questions about my work in a way that made me sound distracted and scattered. When Rebecca mentioned carefully that the estate funds might need to be restructured for tax purposes, her word restructured, I nodded vaguely and said I'd look into it when I had bandwidth. She visibly relaxed. I drove home and sent my attorney 12 new pieces of documentation. The paper trail my attorney assembled over the following weeks was, by her own description, unusually comprehensive. The deleted group chat message, recovered through my screenshot. Banking records subpoenaed through the fraud filing. Text exchanges between Trevor and a financial advisor, a man neither of them had mentioned to me, ever, showing the money had been moved into a private investment vehicle in Trevor's name alone. A recorded phone call, which I had made legally from a state that allows single-party consent, in which Trevor told me the money was being managed carefully and would be available when needed. He said those words. I have them on tape. My attorney filed the fraud complaint on a Thursday morning. Breach of fiduciary duty. Conversion of joint assets. Fraudulent misrepresentation. The words are dry and technical, and they don't capture the thing they describe, which is, your brother took your dead father's money and lied to your face about it for months. I didn't tell them it was coming. I want to be honest about that. I made the choice deliberately, not out of cruelty. I thought about that, I really did. But because I had watched Rebecca manage every situation for the past year and a half, and I knew that if they had even 48 hours, she would build a narrative that made this my fault. I'd seen her do it with smaller things. She had a gift for it. So I let it be a surprise. The first call I got was from Trevor. It was a Saturday just after 9 in the morning. I was on my second cup of coffee. He sounded like I'd never heard him sound before. Not angry, just shattered. Like something had given way. Danny, he said. What did you do? I filed a fraud complaint, I said, because what you did was fraud. We were going to pay it back. With what? The investment that hasn't returned anything? Silence. Trevor, I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it was. You took Dad's money, not your money. His. The thing he spent 30 years building so we'd have something after he was gone. And you took it without asking me. Without telling me. And when I would have found out, you were going to tell me it was for tax purposes. Rebecca said, I know what Rebecca said. I have it documented. Another silence. Longer this time. Dad wouldn't have wanted this, he finally said. Dad wouldn't have wanted any of this, I said. He especially wouldn't have wanted you to steal from his daughter. I hung up. Rebecca called 20 minutes later. Her voice was different, controlled in a way that sounded like she was working very hard to keep it that way. She used words like misunderstanding and context and the way things looked from our perspective. She said they'd been under enormous financial pressure. She said she'd always thought of me as a little sister. She said I was burning down the family over a miscommunication. I let her talk. When she finished, I said, my attorney will be in touch, and ended the call. I'd like to tell you I felt righteous and clean in that moment. Mostly I just felt tired, the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes. The legal process was not fast, and it was not cinematic. There was no single dramatic courtroom moment where everything clicked into place and justice descended like a hammer. It was emails and document requests, and a mediation session in a beige conference room where Trevor sat across from me looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, and Rebecca, who had, I noticed, hired her own separate attorney, didn't look at me once. What I got back? The full amount, plus interest, plus legal fees. The investment vehicle Trevor had set it up in had actually gained some value, which meant my share came back larger than what had been taken. My attorney was professionally pleased. I was something more complicated than pleased. What I lost? That's harder to name. The version of my family I believed in. The mental image of my brother as someone who, at the bottom of everything, would not do this. I keep coming back to the money sitting in that account for 4 months, both of us watching it, and him making the decision. Not once but 4 times to move it. That's not a moment of weakness. That's a choice you make, and remake, and don't stop making. I moved to a different city 6 months later. Not because of them, I'd been thinking about it for a while, but the timing felt clean. I bought a small house with the money. Not big, not flashy. 2 bedrooms, a yard that needs work, a neighborhood where people walk their dogs in the evening and nod at each other. My dad would have liked it. He always said a house you own is the one thing nobody can take from you. He wasn't wrong. He was just unlucky about who raised his son. I don't talk to Trevor anymore. I don't talk to Rebecca. I got a card at Christmas from an aunt I don't see often. She'd clearly heard some version of the story and written something carefully neutral. I appreciated the effort. I've been asked a few times if I regret not giving Trevor a chance to come clean before I filed. If I wish I'd picked up the phone and just asked him, did you take it? Are you going to give it back? I've thought about this a lot. Here's where I land. He had months. He had the Saturday dinner. He had every conversation where he told me the money was fine. A person who wants to come clean finds a way to come clean. A person who says, we were going to pay it back, only after they've been caught, is not a person who is going to pay it back. They're a person who got caught. The thing about structural failure, the thing I keep coming back to in my work, is that the collapse isn't what breaks a building. The collapse is just when the existing damage becomes visible. The real work is finding where it started, what was already compromised, long before anyone noticed. My brother and I are not estranged because I filed that complaint. We're estranged because he took the money. I just made it visible. My dad built things that lasted. He poured careful attention into everything he made. Measured twice, tested the load, never rushed the joints. He taught me that. He thought he'd taught Trevor too. I carry what he gave me. I carry the house, the settlement, the engineer's habit of looking at every structure and asking, where is this most likely to fail? And I carry the conversation we had about 2 weeks before his stroke, when he called me on a Sunday evening for no particular reason, and we talked for almost an hour about nothing important, his tomatoes, my current project, a movie he'd seen, and at the end, just before hanging up, he said, "Danny, I'm glad you're solid, you know that." I said I knew. I didn't know then how much I'd need it. I know now. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty about not warning Trevor first, about letting him walk straight into the legal filing without a phone call, without a heads up, without giving him one last chance to do the right thing. I used to stumble over that question. Now I don't. Here's what I've come to understand. Trevor had chances. He had the months the money sat in that account while I was away working. He had the dinners. He had the Sunday phone calls where I asked, directly, "Is everything okay?" And he said yes. He had the moment in the coffee shop parking lot when I called him and said the account is empty, and instead of saying, "I'm sorry, Danny, I can explain," he said, "You don't have kids, you don't have a mortgage, you needed it less." That's not a man who forgot to do the right thing. That's a man who decided not to. There's a difference. I spent a long time trying to blur it, because blurring it is more comfortable. If he just made a mistake, then I can still hold on to the brother I thought I had. But mistakes don't happen 4 separate times across 9 weeks, in 4 distinct wire transfers. That's a plan. And the person who executes a plan like that has already done their moral accounting and decided it adds up. What I kept coming back to in those quiet weeks while I was building the case was something my dad said once about structural integrity. He said the worst thing you can do to a load-bearing wall is ignore a crack because it's small. A small crack tells you something true about the whole structure. Most people look at the crack and think, that's just one crack. I look at a crack and think, what else don't I know yet? I applied that to my own life after this. I'd ignored a lot of small cracks. Rebecca's comments, the vague answers, the "we'll talk soon" deflections. I filed them away as family friction, as noise. I told myself I was being generous, giving benefit of the doubt. But generosity without discernment isn't a virtue. It's just inattention with a nicer name. The thing that kept me functional through all of it wasn't anger. Anger is loud and it burns fast. What kept me moving was something quieter, a kind of clarity that comes when you stop hoping someone is different than they are and just start working with what's real. My dad's money was taken. I had documentation. I had a legal path. I took it. That's not revenge. Revenge is about making someone feel pain. What I did was closer to repair, putting the structure back the way it was supposed to be, using every tool available to me. I don't know what Trevor and Rebecca's life looks like now. I don't ask. I know their accounts were frozen during the proceedings. I know the financial advisor they've been working with dropped them. I know that things built on a shaky foundation eventually show it. I moved into my house on a Friday in October. The yard needed work. The kitchen needed paint. It was mine, completely and legally and without anyone's permission, and I stood in the middle of it for a long time and just breathed. My dad always said, "The work you do honestly is the only work that holds." He was right. He just didn't know how I'd have to learn it.